Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson, and today I have as a guest someone who has loads of common sense. A lot of times we talk about where has it disappeared, where she's gotten a good portion of it. And this is Congresswoman Mary Miller from Illinois. And, Congresswoman, I have a new book out called A Perilous Fight.
I know, I've read it.
And, it's about the really battle, the cultural battle that's going on with our families here in America. And American families are so important. What is the ideal of the American family to you?
Well, I believe God intended for a husband and wife, a man and a woman, to be committed to each other for life and to welcome children and to use the home as a hub of ministry. Number one, imparting their values to their own children, and then looking beyond their own household to the community and being impactful there.
Exactly. And isn't it interesting that the various study groups, both the conservative ones and the very liberal ones, come to the same conclusion when it comes to children and the outcome for children?
Yes.
They say those who grow up in the traditional nuclear family do better on all levels, in terms of their profession, in terms of their academics, their relationship with the police, mental illness, much better, all these things. So it would seem like people would try to produce policies that lead to the enhancement of the American family, and yet that's not what we're seeing. It's kind of strange, but over the last few decades, the left has really sort of put a target on the ideal of the American family. And, you look at television now, you can't look at a series for very long before up pops a non-traditional type of family. And it's presented not only as acceptable, but maybe as the preferred thing. And you see that in both Hollywood and on local television, on the news. They all seem to be pointing in that same direction. And how and why do you think these things are happening in our nation? Why are we trying to change people's perception?
Well, surely politics impacts it and legislation, which is why I started the Congressional Family Caucus, legislatively to stand up for the family. But I think that the breakdown of the family, first and foremost, has to be laid at the feet of the church. And Jesus told us to stay awake. And I think the church fell asleep while the left was on the march. Marxists, their goal was to infiltrate every institution. They've done that.
Maybe their definition of staying awake is to become woke.
Oh, yeah. True. Well,
because don't you see that happening in our churches? Instead of laying down the law as the Bible states, they're doing this, and they're saying which way is the wind blowing, and they're trying to alter themselves to make themselves acceptable to the people.
Well, surely they either don't know the scriptures or they don't believe the scriptures. But I believe it's Psalm 18 says, as for God, his way is perfect. His ways are perfect. And every word of God proves true. And so, if we want to, our country has been thriving in light of being the most free country with the best opportunities because we had that Judeo-Christian foundation of faith and family. And that's what the Marxists and the people, the globalists that want to take our country down, they're going after that foundation of faith and family.
And it has a lot to do with the divisiveness that we find going on too. Because what do you learn in a good nuclear family? You learn how to respect other people. You learn to respect what your parents tell you. From your siblings, you learn to share, you learn to respect other people's opinions and other people's property. And when you don't get those kinds of values from your family, where do you get your values from? Internet, social media, friends on the street. And you wind up sort of like many of those students that we're seeing on these college campuses now, who really don't have any kind of a solid foundation. And I think they're sort of influenced by whatever wind seems to be blowing. And right now, it's the wind of victims versus oppressors. And so somehow we see Hamas as a victim, even though they slaughtered all those people in a merciless way. And a lot of these students don't even realize that the Hamas terrorists would gladly cut their head off if they had an opportunity to do so. So what do you think is behind all of the student protests? Are they just that ignorant, or is there something else behind it?
Well, I've always said to my children, whoever controls the information controls the people. And so they have been given limited information. Even in public school, they have not been given the creation story or, the biblical foundation. They have been told that they evolved and, basically they're here by random chance and there's no purpose to their life, whatever. But even in light of the political things, what's going on with Hamas and Israel, they're given one side of the story. And, I want to be, and what I appreciate so much about you, is you've recognized the breakdown and the damage it's done and how it's destroyed lives, and there's broken people, broken institutions, but you've retired from this notable profession and, basically the top of your profession, but yet you won't retire because God has a work for you and the country needs you to be a restorer. And that's what I want to do. I think we should joyfully proclaim that God's ways are perfect. We need to repent and go back to our Judeo-Christian values. We sing, God shed his grace on thee, and God truly has shed his grace on our country, but we need to be worthy of him blessing us and return back to him.
Well, isn't it amazing that our founding document talks about our rights coming from our Creator?
Yes.
But, we live in a country where the government tries to say, we can't talk about God, certainly not in a public school. It makes no sense. And it says it on all of our money, in God we trust.
Right.
And, our Pledge of Allegiance says we're one nation under God. And yet we're running away from it.
Right.
And as we run away from godly principles, you look and see what's happening to our country. I don't think anybody could sit there honestly and say they think that we're still moving upwards.
I know.
We're all moving backwards. And there's a correlation there. But, the thing that kind of drives me, because, I looked forward to retirement for a long time because I worked so hard as a neurosurgeon. I said, I'm just going to relax and go on all these cruises and learn to play golf. But seeing what's happening and understanding the impact that has on our children, our grandchildren, that's enough to make me stay involved. What's your motive?
Well, I, like you, have grandchildren. You have 8.
Yes.
Right? And we just welcomed our 20th. And but we want our children and grandchildren to enjoy the freedom and opportunities that we've all had to live out the American dream and be free people, to be able to exercise our faith and raise our family and educate our children the way we want, raise our family in the fear and admonition of the Lord, basically. And, I like to quote Erwin Lutzer, the pastor of Moody Church. He says, evil never retreats on its own, only when it's confronted by a more powerful force. And if the church and Christians are passive, if they're shrinking back, if they're scared, or even if we are ugly, we're not going to move biblical ideas forward where people embrace those. And people are hungry, I think. They're wounded people. Divorce wounds people. I mean, you came from a broken home. And abortion wounds women. Transing our minor children. We are mutilating children's bodies and they're wounded after that.
Exactly.
And we need to be there I told one of my staff that people are where they are, but we want to present to them the better way. Let's return back to the foundations, like Nehemiah, built that wall, rebuilt the wall, and in faith and
Right.
with the people that lived there. They were where they were. They were living amongst the ruins.
Right.
And here comes a man with a vision of rebuilding the wall. And that's what, I think you and I share that and are motivated. I don't know about you, but I have tons of energy and I'm razzed up because God's ways are perfect for the family and for education, for running a government, for economics.
No question. Well, you mentioned the confusion that's thrown into the lives of our children about gender. When you stop and think about it, when fertilization of the egg occurs, you go from two gametes with 23 chromosomes that have no possibility of becoming a human being to one zygote with 46 chromosomes with the complete map for a new human being, not part of the mother, not part of the father, but with a brain that starts developing millions of neurons every day.
Wow.
Later on, billions of neurons every day. By the time a baby is born, that brain is still developing very rapidly, which is why a newborn baby sleeps 20 to 22 hours a day. But the brain doesn't finish developing until your mid to late 20s. And yet we're asking children, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, to make life-altering decisions based on an incompletely developed brain.
I know.
In many cases, without parental involvement, because they try to do it behind the backs of the parents. What do you think about that?
Well, one of the things you mentioned in your book is how transgenderism is the rate of people identifying as transgender is skyrocketing.
Right.
It's mainly among young people, and it's in specific areas: California, New York, Illinois, Washington, D.C., and Hawaii.
Exactly.
And so, first of all, I mean, if it was really something physical,
you'd see it everywhere.
Yes. So right there, I mean, kids are being coached into this. We're hearing about kids that are 5 years old that are being taught to question who they are. And it's, you use the word ridiculous, and it is. And you're a scientist.
Well, it's child abuse is what it is.
Yes, so
Because
sad.
that's the reason that God gives children parents, to protect them during their vulnerable period. And, we're allowing our public school systems to take advantage of that. But the good thing is there are people like you who are out there fighting.
Yeah.
And what has been the response of your colleagues in Congress to the family caucus that you started?
Well, overwhelmingly supportive. There's still some members that I want to encouraged to join the caucus. But mainly what I'm hearing is, why has it taken so long to have a caucus that stands up for the traditional family?
Yeah.
And I think that the marriage vote in 2022 was very disappointing to me, that we had Republicans that voted for that anti-marriage bill. That's what I call it.
Right.
It's definitely going to be an attack on freedom of conscience going forward. I think they're going to use it to bully schools or employers that, want to stand up for traditional marriage.
Right.
So I'm excited about it. We want to motivate people with using legislation to get married by having, taxation laws that promote marriage rather than disincentivize it, promote having children. We want to stand up for school choice.
Right.
And, obviously we're opposed to the whole transgender movement. I'm getting ready to roll out my bill to roll back the Joe Biden's ridiculous Title IX rule, which will force public schools to allow men and boys and girls athletics and their private spaces. And not only that, it's forcing coerced speech. And I can just see teachers getting fired and students being reprimanded or suspended for misgendering someone.
I was talking to a student just 2 days ago, who said, tomorrow is Transgender Day in our school, and we all have to participate.
Oh, my.
And she said, you can be expelled for not using the right pronouns. I mean, can you believe this?
No.
And I said, well, there must be a lot of students who don't believe that. And she said, there are, but, you're taught to keep your mouth shut.
Well, that's why we need to bring the public schools down if they're going to indoctrinate our children versus educating them.
Right.
And I think the role of churches, the primary thing that they need to be doing now, and also people our age that have raised our children,
Right.
we need to turn around and give young people a helping hand and give them alternatives to get their kids out of public school.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. Well, look at the proliferation of homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yes.
more than doubled
I
since
know.
2020. And the faith-based private schools
Mm-hmm.
have long waiting lists.
Yes,
People
I
wanting to get
know.
So,
It's exciting. We can
It
really
is.
impact the future if we continue to promote this and getting kids out of that indoctrination center and where they're hypersexualizing our children. Americans don't want this. They want their children to be educated in the basics, not indoctrinated. By the way, I home educated my 7 children, and
Oh,
we
really?
had almost all of your books in our homeschool library.
Well, I'm delighted to know that.
Yes.
Well, I sat on a lot of admissions committees, college and medical school. And the homeschooled kids were really way out ahead. It was pretty amazing. People think that somehow they would be deprived, but they're forming all kinds of leagues so that they can, play sports and be exposed to all kinds of other things. It really is quite amazing. I wish I'd had something like that.
Yeah.
But it was okay because even though I had a pretty horrible situation with the Detroit public school system, I had a mother who was completely sold on the ideal of education.
I know. I
Being
would have
the way
loved to
out.
have met her.
She was an amazing
I
person.
know.
Probably the wisest person I've ever known. But what a difference it makes when you can get a solid education, because that's your ticket. You can write whatever you want, but now you see that the schools are concentrating on DEI and things that have nothing to do with merit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I think America rose to the pinnacle so quickly is because we had a system in place that was based on merit.
Yes.
And people were incentivized to do well.
Right.
And we did do well. You look at the number of inventions that came out of this country versus the rest of the world over the last 150 years. It is astonishing. But it was the environment that we created that made the difference.
Well, Thomas Edison was homeschooled.
Yes, he was.
I think his teacher called him addled or something.
She did.
And he was probably just so brilliant he couldn't stand to sit in this little school desk. And so one thing about homeschoolers that I've recognized is they read more than the kids in public school. And so the way my curriculum was, when my kids got older, they were self-taught. So they had the book and they would read their own math book instead of a teacher spoon-feeding them. So I think when they got to college, they were used to, it's kind of how colleges run. They'll tell you read 3 chapters. They were used to it.
Well, what do you think is going to happen with the introduction of AI and virtual reality into the educational arena?
Oh, I don't know. It's
Because,
kind of like Star Wars-ish. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard enough right now to get the kids away from the PlayStation and the Nintendo.
I know.
When they can disappear into their own world,
Right.
can you imagine what's going to happen?
I know.
And what it really means, and what I've been telling people, is it means when you become a parent, you got to really be a parent. And otherwise, your kid's going to disappear away from you before you know it.
I know. My heart goes out to young people today. I personally think it's harder to raise children today because of technology and now with the AI. But I want to encourage parents and young people to get their kids into the Word of God and then to do this alongside of them, to work together, find something to do. If we live on a farm, but if you live in an urban area, you can have little businesses or find work to do together and serve, and then let your kids suffer a little. We were talking about how good it is for kids to learn delayed gratification but
and
anyway.
work for what they have, and appreciate the relationship
Right.
between work and achievement. But also, I think in this new age that we're in, where there's so many distractions for the kids, parents have to specifically have a plan on how they're going to engage their children, because there are too many other distractions otherwise. And when my kids were growing up, you probably read in the book, I was very busy as a pediatric neurosurgeon. Leave at 5:30 in the morning, get home at 9 at night. They wouldn't even know who I was. So I was doing a lot of lecturing, and I made it a requirement that my family go with me wherever I went.
That's great.
So they had frequent flyer cards for every airline and traveled all over the world.
That's great. Wow, what an experience.
It made a big difference in terms of the quality of the time. But the other thing we did is at dinner time, everybody was required to recite a little known fact, something that everybody else was probably not going to know.
How fun.
So we got to know a lot of obscure things. It was pretty cool. Everybody really, it got to be pretty competitive after a while. The boys wanted to bring a fact. No one knows this.
That's great. Did you keep a record of any of them?
No, but I think it inspired them to learn how to do research.
Oh.
So
that's great.
And they've all become, very successful young men. They all got married the same year, 2011.
I read that. That's crazy. Well, but marrying off a son isn't like marrying a daughter. It's not.
In a way, if they all marry American girls, that's true.
Oh, well.
But none of them marry traditional American girls. So that was cool. But there must be some things that you and some of your colleagues are thinking about to combat the war, the cultural war on the American family.
Yes.
What are some of the things?
I've introduced with Mike Lee from
Utah.
From Utah, and he had it in the Senate, the Screen Act, which, what a rot on our culture is pornography. And I believe now the average age that a child logs onto pornography is 8 years old. And it used to be just men. Now the women are having or girls porn addictions. And so the Screen Act is going to require tech companies to identify that the porn user is 18 or over. So that's,
But how do they enforce that?
I'm not exactly sure how the enforcement mechanisms will come up, but they're going to have to come up with something. Of course, then, obviously we're standing against the transgender movement. We have all kinds of pro-life bills. I want to pass a bill, because the left always is like, trust the women and, women's rights. Well, women are smart people. So when it comes to abortion, let them have all the information. They should be given the information on the development of the baby, any kind of risks involved. They should be required to have an ultrasound, because what other invasive major medical decisions do you have when you're not given all the information on what you're doing? I mean, is there anything besides abortion and transgendering a minor?
It really is. I mean, it reminds me of COVID, with the inoculations. They didn't tell people what was going on with the VIIRS data. I mean, if people knew what was going on with VIIRS data, they would run the other way. But we have a long way to go with regaining the trust that people have in our public health system after that. But I'm so glad to hear that you guys are doing something about that. And we need more people to get involved, more people to run for Congress. There are so many people who say, I could never get involved with the government. That's just too nasty. But if the good people say that, then who's left? And we,
So I brought that up at our church, and I said, sometimes people in churches, or if they're Jewish in their synagogue,
yeah,
I sometimes feel like they put their nose in the air and they're like, well, I'm only religious, the gospel, I don't do politics. And I go, you may not care about politics, but politics cares about you.
mm-hmm.
They care about your paycheck, the money in your pocket. They care about your children. They are after your children.
Right.
They care about your liberties. They care about your speech. They care about your privacy.
Right.
Like, you better get with it,
Mm-hmm.
because they care deeply and they are on the march. They're very aggressive. And like I said before, the evil isn't going to retreat on its own.
Right.
Got to push back against it.
And as I tell people all the time, you're told from the time that you're a small child, there are two things that you don't talk about in public: politics and religion.
I know.
Those are the two things we need to be talking
I know,
about.
it's crazy.
Because evil works best in darkness.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want
Yeah.
you to shine the light on
Right.
them and what they're doing. It's just like Satan. Satan wants people. That's a myth. Guy with the horns and the tails and the pitchfork. They try to make it so ridiculous that people say, oh, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't. Believe me, there is evil.
Right.
And there's,
Well, people don't inform themselves. They claim to be Christian or whatever. They don't read their Bibles.
right.
But I tell people all the time, the left wants us uninformed,
Mm-hmm.
apathetic, afraid,
Yeah.
and finally divided. And they will conquer us if we yield to any of or all of those.
You're completely on target there. And I hope people are listening to you. I hope your constituents in Illinois are listening. I hope people across the country are listening, because people have to recognize that when they come out and they take strong stances like you do, you're going to be persecuted.
Yeah.
They're going to say all kind of horrible things about you. You're far right, crazy,
Name calling.
supremacist,
Yeah.
whatever. What a bunch of garbage. But what I tell people is, when they start calling your names, you're winning.
Yeah. Yeah.
When they don't have good arguments for what they're talking about, it's a problem. But courage is what's needed at this stage of the game,
Yeah.
because one of the things that I discovered when I was running was from the smallest little hamlets to the largest cities, most of the people actually had common sense. What they lacked was courage.
Yeah.
They'd rather stand in the corner and look at the floor than to express themselves and possibly be canceled or have somebody call them a nasty name. But you can't be the land of the free if you're not the home of the
Right.
brave. You got to be willing to stand up.
Well, people will say to me that they agree, and then they'll say, but if I, and I said, if you are afraid of what you're going to lose, I'm just telling you right now, you are going to lose
it.
everything.
Yeah.
Our country is hanging on by a thread. And if people don't get involved, like, I know when I was asked to run, my first response was, well, I'm not a politician and I'm not a lawyer. But the man that encouraged me to run, he said, Mary, you represent the family, and the family is the foundation of the culture. And you represent agriculture, and agriculture is the foundation of our economy.
Right.
And I rethought it, and I thought, our founding fathers, I believe, had a vision that people from diverse backgrounds would step forward and take a turn. Like,
Absolutely.
so I'm taking turn, and also not to, like, being in Congress isn't more important than getting involved in your community and offering alternatives for public education, or, helping, an unwed mother, or volunteering at a crisis pregnancy center. I mean, there's so many places to serve, but everybody should have some place that they're serving.
Well, you're the poster child in Congress for families.
Yeah.
So what last parting word would you like to leave with our audience?
I just want to say, as for God, his way is perfect. And Jesus Christ came, he said he wanted us to have an abundant life. And the abundant life is submitting to he created us to his design for family, for government, for economy. God's ways are perfect.
Amen. That's something that I cannot disagree with. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. And it's the reason that this country is so favored, and the reason that we went from nowhere to the pinnacle in record time.
Yep.
And if we will as it says in Second Chronicles 7:14,
Mm-hmm.
if my people
Yes.
who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and turn from their
Right.
wicked ways, I will forgive their sins and heal their land. That healing is desperately needed. And we've had 4 revivals in this country,
Oh, I didn't know that.
and they've been generally centered around either pestilence or war.
Oh.
We got both of those things. So I think we're ready for number 5. And we want everybody to get involved. I want to thank
Yes.
you for being courageous
Oh.
and leading the way.
Well, you're the one that's courageous. I appreciate you so much, Dr. Carson.
Thank you. And make sure you join us for all of our podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple. You can get everything. You don't have to miss any of it. Rate us, review us, and make sure you tell your neighbors and friends about us. And importantly, remember the cornerstone principles. You know what they are? Faith, liberty, community, and life. We'll see you next time.